third-party content has been copied and communicated pursuant to Part 5A or 5B of the Copyright Act, unless indicated otherwise.
All right, it's 2 o'clock, so we'll make a start. Freedom and Subjectivity, Week 5. This is our last week of Sartre, so if you've been enjoying him, this is your last week to relish in the experience. If you've been not enjoying him, one more week and you're free. But then again, if you haven't been enjoying him, you should probably be using this as your last chance to sort of capture what he's trying to tell us. Obviously not Russell Grigg, which means that Russell Grigg has become Pierre in the cafe. Yeah, present in his absence. Yeah, good. Little Sartrean joke. My name is Tim. I did my PhD under Russell a few years ago, 6 years ago or something, on Lacan and Nietzsche. It's actually coming out as a book in a couple of months too with SUNY Press if you want to see the sorts of research one can do at Deakin under certain supervisors at the PhD level. It's my email there, there's my Facebook there as well if you want to stay in touch and exchange ideas. I think I know most of you from the tutes. There's maybe one or two that hasn't been making the tutes. I do both of the tutes, so if you haven't, I know who's been naughty and nice, like Santa. Sometimes people have clashes though, so that's all right, as long as they keep up online. Right, today we're going to be talking about being with others, or is it being for others? There seems to be an ambiguity over this. So, coast is clear. There's no exit. Being for others and being with others seem kind of similar, but maybe they're not. So the title of the week's called Being with Others, but the main new concept or category of Sartre's we're going to be dealing with is called, in his own terminology, being for others. So one of the things we'll get to discuss, think about in the lecture and discuss in the tutes is whether there's a substantial difference there. One of the readings and one of the comprehension questions brings that out. All right, first key concept, which will introduce what being for itself means, is the idea of the other with a capital O. How do we recognise, as in meet, treat, etc., the other? All right, what's the other for Sartre? It's another free self, a fellow human being, another being for itself. A being for itself has consciousness, unlike things which he calls being in itself. This is sort of standard Sartrean ontology. But the question arises, is this other a friend or a foe? Do they ally with or rather limit our freedom? And this is where the unit guide directs us to the first reading for this week, The Look, which is a selection from Being and Nothingness, which I hope you've had a quick look at, or at least some look at, in the lead up to this lecture. All right, what's the look? Let's make this bigger. We relate to the world through knowledge. We categorise objects, we represent things, we posit causal sequences to assimilate, incorporate them to ourselves as a for itself. We are in our own world once we've done this. We're in our comfort zone. Say, if we're in this lecture theatre, we'd say, okay, there's the lights, there's the mic, there's the USB, there's the big screens, there's texters, there's a whiteboard. It's a way where someone comes into a room as a for itself and just starts projecting categories onto things. So they can sort of assimilate them and master them and have them worked out according to their own needs. I know where everything is. I'll put my stamp on everything using my will to power, a Nietzschean term, which the unit guide mentions. And once I've done that, a bit of caffeine from a dodgy energy drink, all right, I'm ready to go, right? I'm in my comfort zone. I've created this world. project. That's what Sartre's talking about when he says we relate to the world through knowledge. However, the look of another can disintegrate this. Another subject, right, or person is not like an object, it looks back. That's when your lecturer then looks up and says, hey, there's some things out there that aren't like chairs and tables and carpets and lights. You know, unlike those things, they look back. They're like me. They're another for itself. What if they're seeing the whole thing differently? What if their view of like, oh, God, why is he using the big screen? Why doesn't he use the whiteboard? Or don't use that mic, it's shit, use that one. Or why isn't he Russell? Or you know, whatever you're thinking. You could be thinking a whole host of different things because you're not a being in itself, you're a being for itself. You are the other. You have a consciousness. And Sartre's park example, which is page 341 of the reading, and we'll go through that in the tutes and try to answer some of the comprehension questions, is meant to sort of illustrate this, right? There's Sartre, walking in the park, smoking his pipe, wearing his fur coat. And then someone else turns up. He's got everything kind of sorted before then. Here I am, there's the park, there's the green of the lawn, there's the benches at this distance from the lawn. Next thing you know, there's someone else. Hey, he's not like other things. He could be seeing things completely differently. He may have a different world view. And this for Sartre disintegrates himself, or disintegrates his position as the centre. All his projections disintegrate, and it leaves the possibility of a challenge. All right? Reading from here, the look of the other means the park is no longer his. All in itself can be arranged differently by a rival for itself. Sartre is no longer the centre of projections. So this is where we come up with the third ontological category, being for others, which for Sartre is a kind of solution to this problem or to this encounter. It's his response to that encounter, of encountering other things that aren't like mere things but are more like himself as a for itself. All right, the look of the other can create a crisis. This is me paraphrasing the unit guide, paraphrasing Sartre. Right? The other is not an in itself but another for itself. See Sartre in this photo looking around, right? My God, I'm not surrounded by just chairs and tables, but people, other for themselves. What are they thinking? Now for Sartre, the solution is to open up an awareness of a third ontological category for times when we are with others, surrounded. In such times, the being for itself becomes a being for others. So that's ontological category 3, and it's a consequence of the encounter with the other, where the other with a capital O means the other who is a person, another subject, and not an object, another for itself. Now, is this being for others, is it always so easy? Does it always run so smoothly for Sartre? He's already used a phrase like disintegration, which doesn't sound that inviting, right? And actually, judging by his facial expression there too, it's not actually. Being for others is not something that is likely to go smoothly. Instead, for Sartre, what opens up is the potentiality of a master-slave relation. All right, Sartre. The encounter with the other can lead to a master-slave relation. Why? Because each tries to subordinate the other to their own worldview. In certain circumstances, it can even lead to a death match. It's not just this is my park, this is your park, or that's a nice lawn, or no, it's not, I think it's a terrible lawn. It can be something more serious than that. When you come up against another for itself, another, or the other, who projects a different worldview. It could be, that's my water supply. No, it's not. It's mine. They're our oil resources. No, they're not. They're ours. Well, that's my role to do this and that. No, it's not. Your role should be something else. That's my role. All right? So the encounter with the other can lead to this sort of clash, And what results from this clash is a kind of master-slave relation where the winner, right, becomes the master and sets terms for how to be recognised as a subject, as a free for itself. Because I won that contest, whether it was a fight to the death in extreme circumstances, or whether just some kind of argument where I asserted my will to power over yours, right, or vice versa, if I lost, whoever wins says, now this is how it is. My projection onto the world is the one that stays, and this is who I am in that projection. I set the terms for how I'm going to be recognised as a subject. If I win, I'm still free. You're not. I'm going to tell you what you are too. You're the object of my look. And you no longer have free consciousness. You are no longer a for itself. You are an in itself. You are a slave to the master. And of course, vice versa if you're the one who wins. So you see in this picture here, we've got Sartre being with Che Guevara. And when Che Guevara talks about the relations of North America and South America, he's not talking about a fantastic harmonious relationship where North America's greater wealth and power are used to foster great arts and culture in the South, and harmonious trading relations where the natural resources of South America can be used for the people of South America to educate them and give them good hospitals and schools. He's saying that's not what's going on at all. What's going on is that South America is made a slave to North America. North America is the master. They've won at the death match. There's these little conflicts. There's these other sorts of political engineering going on. And we're the losers. We're the slaves. So that's why we've got to fight to try and win back. That's Che Guevara, right? And then you have Sartre, who's there being with Che Guevara as a for itself. He's not there trying to tell Che Guevara to not worry about it. Nah, mate, it's all in your head. You'll be right. So there's a sense where maybe there's a combination of being with and being for there, insofar as they're sharing ideas and forming an alliance. Maybe they're being with, insofar as they're talking about a conflict between North and South. They're talking about how the being for others can turn into a master-slave relation. And similar if you think about his relation with Simone de Beauvoir, sitting next to him. Next week's subject, of course, is the topic is on de Beauvoir and her second sex book. And her claim there is that woman is the slave of man, that there has been a dialectic, a struggle between man and woman, and man has used his extra physical strength or whatever to subjugate woman, or gave a false consciousness about what it meant to be a woman, such that she became the object of the man. So there we have an example of how the being for others relation can work, how it can turn into a master-slave contest. And you have an example of Sartre in the middle of it, sympathetic. So maybe he's more of a being with character in that moment. We'll talk a bit more about the being with in a second, but let's see where this master-slave dialectic came from. It actually comes from the philosopher Hegel. This state, this master-slave relation, is not a happy one for Hegel, or Hegel tells us, and does not achieve full self-consciousness, or full or free self-consciousness. Why? For the recognition by the slave is merely forced on pain of death. The master's self-consciousness depends on the slave for recognition. The master thereby is also a slave, while he depends on the other for this faulty and coerced recognition. So there's a sense where the master says to the slave, this is who I am, and you have to assent to that view because I won the death match. But can the master really be sure that that's what he is? The slave's only saying that so he doesn't get killed. So there's a sense where the master becomes dependent on this faulty and coerced recognition from the slave. That's a sort of Hegel's kind of spin on it. So I guess he's siding with the slave in a sense there. He's saying that it's not just the slave who's a slave, but it's the master who's a slave insofar as he depends on the slave for this faulty recognition. To give you an example of that, there's one of my teachers at La Trobe, where I did my philosophy major many years ago. George Vassilikopoulos, a very Hegelian influenced philosopher. He's written on issues of class and race, whiteness theory and stuff like that. And he told me this sort of Hegelian type story once, where he said, when the British arrived here in Australia, they conquered all the lands, right? The Aboriginals, in a sense, became the slaves. The British became the masters. The land was taken from them, and asserted for the property of the crown. But there's a sense where can the master really be recognised as a master in that situation when the Aboriginals are so different? Like, can the British master say, "Look how great we are farming this land"? Wouldn't the Aboriginals say, "Yes, yes, sir, you're very great," but quietly saying, "What are they farming land for? How boring. We had a way better way of doing things, but that's all right, That's how they do it. Isn't our football code great?" The Aboriginals go, "Why are they playing that game? That's silly. We had better games, but that's all right." There's a sense where, because the consciousness was so different, the master was not getting the recognition he wanted. So where does he get it from? By bringing in immigrants from Europe, for instance, from Southern Europe. Greeks and Italians, as they become known, who are different but close enough to recognise those European values of mastery that the British early settlers and colonisers wanted. So that's an example of how the master-slave dialectic, or that theory, can be applied to various situations in the world. Now, there's more. This is a Hegelian story. It's a way of saying that the master is not really a master. He's dependent on the slave and desperate to get recognition from the slave. But he can never really satisfy any doubt he might have of whether he's a master or not. But there's another aspect to that. This is what Hegel says. The master is also separated from nature. Why? Because he gets the slave to do the work for him. The slave does the work. He shapes nature into products for the master so he can sell them or make a profit or consume them. But eventually the slave, the worker, so you can sort of hear how Marx uses this dialectic as well. The worker or the slave eventually knows more about nature, more about the material world. He's the one working on it, while the master is up, eating grapes or fanning himself to get out of the heat. So the worker or the slave eventually returns to greater free self-consciousness through staying connected with nature, through knowledge. The master loses touch and forms another form of dependency on the worker, on the slave. And then it becomes ripe for a role reversal, a revolution, Marx would say, or an overthrow, right? Master becomes slave, and slave becomes the new master. So if you're reading stuff about Marx, Hegel sort of interpretations of history, sometimes they're told in in these sorts of terms, the master-slave dialectic, where the two categories that Marxists in particular use are the bourgeoisie, right? Those who own the means of production, and the proletariat, those who work for those who own the means of production but own nothing themselves. They only have their labour to sell. Of course, it doesn't always lead to revolution the way Marx talked about, and other theorists, more contemporary theorists, who take up this master-slave relation, do it in a way where they try to improve it or use it in a more original way. One example is Alexander Kojev, who was the great Hegelian interpreter in Paris, where all the sort of intelligentsia would go to Kojev lectures on Hegel, and Kojev used Marx and Heidegger as a way to interpret what Hegel was saying in a more fundamental way, and also Lacan. Lacan was also very influenced of Kojev and connected to Kojev, and he explores this master-slave dialectic in his Seminar 17, which came out in English just a few years ago and was translated by our very own Russell Grigg, so you'll be very proud to have someone of that calibre at this university. But for Lacan, what the master gets separated from and what the slave or the worker tends to pick up or produce is knowledge of jouissance, knowledge of enjoyment. The master is so busy staying in control that he loses that sort of common touch, he loses knowledge of jouissance, and that can set things turning around. Anyway, that's just for further interest if you want to do some extra reading or some Google searches on the weekend and stimulate your thinking and your mind some more. All right. Solipsism. This is one of the key issues that comes up also in this week's Unicode. Does Russell usually ask questions in the lectures, or does he just save it for the shoots? Sometimes? What do you guys prefer? Do you want some Q&A, or do you want to just absorb and think about it, make notes and talk more in the shoots? Maybe we'll talk more on the shoots, because then there'll be no differentiation. It'll just be the same thing for 3 hours, for me anyway, 2 hours for you. All right. Solipsism. It's basically the idea, or the fear, paranoid fear, or the skeptical thought that I am the only mind in the world. Or if you're having the thought that you're the only mind that exists in the world, how do you know for sure there are other minds? How do you know for sure there's just your mind and then everyone else is just the illusion, like of a body with a mind in it? You can know your own mind through direct introspection, right? You're conscious of your thoughts. As Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. When I start on this method of systematic doubt, because it goes back to Descartes, this idea, the only thing I can't doubt is that I am the one doing the doubting. I can doubt everything else, right? And he imagines some deceitful demon comes and tells him all these stories to do his head in. Tells him, no, how do you know there's a lecture theatre? Because you can see it. No, I'm feeding you false information through your senses. I'm getting into your brain, right? There's no lecture theatre. How do you know there's other people? They're not there. I'm feeding false information, into your brain, into your senses to give you that sort of idea. Or if you say, okay, just say there are other people, right? Well, how do I know they have minds? That could just be part of the illusion too. I can directly perceive my own mind, but all I can perceive on you is your external behaviour. And from that I can infer there's a mind behind it, but how do I know for sure? I can't see your mind. I can see what I take to be the effects of a mind, right? A body moving, eyes frowning or smiling or shifting in the chair, tapping the chin, having a think about it, all the sort of things we say, okay, yeah, that's what people do when they're thinking. Yeah, there's a mind there, but I can't actually see your mind. So that's where the sort of the doubt comes from the indirectness of the inference, right? Descartes' deceitful demon, that's where it goes back to, but also Hilary Putnam's sort of modern version of that is, how do you know you're not a brain in a vat, right? With electrodes hooked up to give yourself the illusion that you're in a world full of other people and other minds. And that was the sort of premise from the film The Matrix, which this photo comes from. I just made a little note here. The brain in a vat argument is usually taken to be the modern version of Descartes' argument. Yep. I've basically covered all that in my free association around the slide. You guys remember the film The Matrix? Is that sort of on your saw? Yeah, it's a pretty big deal when it came out. So a question for the choose to consider is, how does Sartre in particular overcome this doubt? You might say, I never had the doubt in the first place, that's fair enough, but when philosophers, when they want to test whether they really know the stuff they know, especially coming, like Descartes dwells in the Middle Ages where Christianity was the truth, including all the like beliefs associated with it, and if you doubted it, and you were wrong to doubt it, not only could you be burnt at the stake, but you could, go to hell. So I guess, philosophers, are thrown into the world and realise as they're socialised in it that one day, as being free thinkers, that they've got a head full of a whole lot of false beliefs. So scepticism becomes a tool to kind of critically challenge knowledge claims. And then it's just a matter of, well, how far does that scepticism go? If you doubt this, you doubt that, you doubt that. And then the question of what counts as evidence kind of emerges. And I think solipsism kind of emerged as one of those sorts of weird sceptical thought experiments, which is still interesting for epistemological purposes. How do you know? How do you know that you know? Like, you have a concept of being, a concept of reality. How do you know it's true? How do you know that you know it's true? Maybe it's just a belief that you don't know is true. Maybe you believe it because someone told you it was true. Maybe that was Descartes' deceitful demon, or or somebody feeding you stuff through wires. Right? Obviously it's not that, but still, we could have beliefs that aren't wholly true. Solipsism. So we'll have a look in the tutes, how Sartre deals with that. All right, now the next key term, what I'm basically doing is going through the unit guide and picking out some of the key points and putting them up on a slide just to give you some trigger points so that you can start forming an understanding of them or consolidate your understanding of them if you've already had done your proper preparation and come to the tute having read this week's material. So ontology is one of the big words that gets thrown up as well. I mentioned epistemology, which is a theory of knowledge. So solipsism is one of the problems that emerges as a result of epistemology, the question of how do we know? How do we know that we know? What counts as evidence to consolidate that we know? Ontology is something a little bit different. Note, the unit guide says, that the subtitle of Sartre's Being and Nothingness is a phenomenological essay on ontology. Phenomenology, as I've mentioned in the tutes and was mentioned in last week's unit guide, is the method which makes consciousness itself an object of consciousness, a kind of meta-consciousness. And I always sort of illustrate it with a drawing, something like this. There you are as a subject, looking at the object, and you imagine that you can see it directly. This object is X, Y, Z, I mean, no doubt. But, maybe you're wrong. So what you can do as part of that is have a look at how you look at the object, which means stepping back and making cognition itself an object of cognition, or making consciousness itself an object of consciousness. And then you can sort of have a think in this way of, well, what kind of preconceptions do I bring to the table? What kind of framework am I viewing the object through? If I'm a Marxist, I'll see it one way. If I'm a feminist, I'll see it another way. If I'm a capitalist, I'll see it another way again. If I'm a Christian, a different way. If I'm a pagan, another way again. So what is the object? And by stepping back and making consciousness itself an object of consciousness, we can reveal different aspects of the object and maybe get a truer picture or a different picture. So that's where phenomenology is very important as a method. It's the method of looking at how we look. And by reflecting on that, maybe improving on how we look. How we look may have been fine in one area of our life where we find ourselves, we're thrust in another. Maybe those concepts and categories don't apply so well. And we need to look at how we look to improve or change them. So that's sort of what phenomenology does. It goes back to Husserl. Heidegger was the first big sort of exponent of it, a big star student. And Sartre writes Being and Nothingness about 10 or 15 years after Heidegger's Being and Time. So you've got a bit of a genealogy there. All right, now what results from phenomenology is an ontology. An ontology is a theory of being, a description of the different ways things in the world can be. The word ontos just means being, and logy, of course, means the science of or the study of. Usually means that in English, unless you're thinking about Scientology, then that's just a confusion. The science of science. Huh? And the results are nothing scientific, of course. The results are Tom Cruise. Anyway, ontology is what results. So as we're doing this phenomenology as a method, we come up maybe with a different theory of being, or a different account, or a new account, or an improved account of the kinds of things that exist in the world and the different kinds of ways different kinds of things can exist in the world. And that's basically what Sartre's done. Right? When he's sitting in the cafe, when he's sitting on the park bench, right, having a look, doing his phenomenology. He's not just looking at the world, he's looking at how he looks at the world. Right? He's doing phenomenology. And that's basically how he comes up with his new ontology, or his own distinctive contribution to ontology, which is the three categories that we've been thinking of, right? There are three key modes of being for Sartre. Maybe there's more in his book, I don't know, but we're dealing with three key ones anyway. That's an interesting question to follow up. Being in itself, there's things. There's beings for itself, there's me as a person with consciousness. Then there's this thing of being for others, when I'm suddenly encountered by the other. Not another chair or a table or a carpet, but another person with eyes who's looking back at me, with a consciousness just like me. Why are these three fundamental ontological categories for Sartre? Because they can't be reduced to each other, i.e., the way we exist to other people is different to how we exist to ourselves, and different again to how we exist to things. So for him, these are three fundamental categories. You can't replace one or substitute one for the other. Unless you get into some kind of master-slave battle, and bad faith's going to come into it somewhere. So that's where these aren't just some abstract notions that he's sketching up just for fun. It's all about how it's going to affect in some ways his notion of politics and ethics and praxis. I've got a little picture there of. I won't give you a cheat. Anyone know who that's a painting of? Abraham? No. Aristophanes? No, but close. There's an A in one of the words. And it's from a simile. Aristotle, yeah. It's this one here. Where does the mouse go? There it is. Yeah, it's Aristotle there. Who's the other one? Plato, exactly. Aristotle was, of course, Plato's student. And we have, through them, we have an example of a different ontology, a very famous one in the history of metaphysics, or the history of philosophy. Plato, and this is a painting by Raphael called The School of Athens, right? Plato points upwards because for him, ideas are more real than the things they represent. And they don't exist in the things, they don't exist in your mind, they exist metaphysically. They are transcendent ideas and they're more real than the physical things. For him, like the physical world is an imperfect copy of the world of ideas. It's a very interesting little system. To give you an example, has anybody done that course, Plato, Nietzsche and the Meaning of Being? We've got a subject in philosophy on that? Yeah? All right, cool, so you'd be familiar with this. So, just say there's like a black horse, a white horse, a brown horse, a small horse, a fast horse, and a lame horse. How do you know that they're all horses? Because of the idea of horse, right? There must be an idea of horse, or else how would you recognise all those different horses? In modern language, or in modern ontology, we'd say, well, I have a concept of horse in my mind. I know what a horse is, right? It's an animal with a mane and a tail, blah, blah, blah. But for Plato, there's no, idea in the mind, right? The Greek word of which is psyche, which we do as psyche, right? Which words like psychology come from. For him, this is more like, not like a mind, but like a soul, because he's a metaphysician. There's a religious component to Plato's thinking. Plato is a religious ontologist, unlike Sartre, right? And it's the same for dogs, right? You know all these different objects are dogs because you've got the idea of dog in your mind. Right? Idea of dog. And then you think, maybe there's something that connects these two ideas too, isn't it? It's like the idea of animal. The dog and horse are both animals, so you've got an idea of animal. But also it connects those two, and you keep going up and up and up and up until you get, at a meta level, not the idea of a particular thing, but the idea of ideas itself. Right? The idea of ideas is right at the top, and we'll put it right up here. Idea of ideas. And this has a kind of theological presence in Plato's system. So you can see what ontology is. It's a theory of what things there are, what are things, what kinds of things there are. And for him, all the things in the physical world are imperfect copies of the things in this metaphysical world. Right? So mathematical entities are really high because they're already abstract and not directly connected to physical stuff. And morality, very high, because it's all about, for Plato, turning away from material drives and lusts and vices and doing something moral towards the good. And he also calls this idea of ideas the idea of the good, and also theos, which we get the word theology from, or ontotheology. That's Plato, right? That's why he's pointing up. Now for Aristotle, as a student of Plato, he had a slightly different take. For him it was like, no, old man Plato. Down. The forms are in the matter. We don't have transcendent forms. That's just How do you know? Well, you can't really see that. It's just an inference. The forms are in the matter. They're in the material itself. So, in a sense, Aristotle is a bit more of a materialist, a kind of materialist conversion of Plato, as Lacan calls it, and in some ways, closer to scientific materialist accounts of the world today. Different ontology. So that's just an example of showing how some key examples of from the history of ontology and key sort of conflicts from the history of ontology. One between a pupil and a student there. Socrates, of course, was Plato's student. So you've got like a little lineage. Socrates, Plato, Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, Aristotle taught who? Sorry? Taught Greek? Socrates? No, Socrates taught Plato. Unless he went back in time. He actually taught Alexander the Great, but didn't really teach him to be a philosopher per se, but gave him a bit of an inkling. All right. Now, somebody who worked very hard in philosophy to bring ontology back in favour, was Martin Heidegger. This is where we come to his notion of being with, and this is something that Solomon points out in the unit guide. That Sartre's being for others sounds a little bit like Heidegger's notion of being with others, right? So what's mitsein? Being with. Heidegger's term to describe how our existence is tied up with that of others, a mutual awareness, which is a distinctive human quality. Now, it's not always positive, and I was looking up some of it today. If you've got a copy of Being and Time, we've also got a subject called Language and Reality, I think. Has anyone done that one? Language and Reality, yeah? Where it's Heidegger, Gadamer and Frege, isn't it? Yeah. So if you go to the index of this book, if you've got it, and look up mitsein, you'll get straight on the sections. And it's not always positive. It can be indifference. Our being with others can be indifference. It can be quarrelling. But when it is positive, it can mean a sense of community, citizenship, understanding, care, empathy, a being well disposed towards each other, the giving of interdependent projects in and for the world. So that's sort of what's going on here. Rather than a master-slave dialectic, we've got some kind of being with of interdependent projects, right? I want to teach, you want to learn, you want to produce a good essay, some good thinking, I'm going to mark that, the university wants the marks, all these sorts of interdependent projects going on in the world. Maybe there's a master-slave current going around unconsciously, right, that we're not always aware of, or that we try and keep at a distance. And that's where I think Sartre's notion of the free self is important. When he's bringing up stuff that sounds really pessimistic, don't reduce your situation to it. Just say, okay, that's the facticity, but I'm still free to choose creatively in response to it, to how I take up and respond to that situation. But Sartre, being Sartre, is going to focus on how being for others or being with others is seldom pleasant, right? Even a casual stroll in the park can be spoiled. However, he thinks it solves the problem of solipsism. He thinks when we see this other, right, and disintegrate in front of their projections, etc., we immediately intuit the other as a real mind like our own who can shake our own world and shake us out of our comfort zone. So for Sartre, this is like the refutation of solipsism. As soon as I see another and the potential of a master-slave clash arises, I instantly intuit that they are another mind just like mine, who can do exactly what I do, but maybe in a different way, and maybe lead to some kind of clash. So these are the sorts of ways that Sartre wants to get out of this notion of solipsism. I raised a little question here, maybe a little psychoanalytic question, that could solipsism be some kind of distorted fantasy? Our fear of the other, challenging our worldview, may become a repressed wish that they were not real. I wish you were all not real, so then I'm safe. Maybe that's something that's going on in solipsism. Who knows? But this is when we come to the last, I think, key concept this week. The look. Caught by the look, the keyhole example. Now, imagine you're the guy in this picture looking in the keyhole. Right? You're that guy looking in the keyhole. Now imagine everyone else in the room has caught you and is looking at you sternly while you were doing it. Or to parry another way, I'm here looking through the keyhole, and suddenly it's like, That's the look. That's being caught in the look. The other's look may brand you. Moshi smiled and laughed. Oh my God, do I look foolish now? I've been branded a fool, right? Somebody else might have been saying, oh, look at him, what a peeping Tom, right? This is the idea that we can be caught in the look of the other and labelled and reduced to a thing. That's what it means to be caught in the look. And for Sartre, that moment, that shiver in the spine, that shame that might hit you, is proof that there are other minds. That's almost an immediate sort of intuition for Sartre. But he thinks it's bad faith to accept being caught in the look in this way, because A, you might have a legitimate reason for peeking. If you're a lecturer, you might be just trying to demonstrate something to the students. This guy here, I think this is from a gangster film, so if he's the cop, he's just wondering whether it's the right time to spring his trap. So if somebody sees him and gives him a stern look like he's being peeping Tom, he might just look back and say, hey, I'm a cop, shut up, don't be so judgmental, and sort of put it back on the looker, right? That's the sort of dialectic that happens. But, even if you are doing something illicit that gives you shame, it's bad faith to let somebody completely define you in that look, because for Sartre, you're always free. Even if you are doing a peeping Tom thing in that moment, doesn't mean that that's your essence for life. You can just say, okay, I'm free, I can change. I cannot do that. So the stuff we learnt about early on in the course still applies to get out of some of the jams that comes up later on in the course, like the master-slave dialectic and being caught in the look of the other. Now, there's a famous play that Sartre wrote called No Exit, which has this famous phrase that everybody knows. Does anybody speak French? Anyone studied French? Spanish? That's a Latin-based language like French, but it's different pronunciation. How would you say that? L'enfer c'est le autre? The top line. Sorry. Yeah. That sounds good enough. Yeah. What it means is hell, l'enfer, is other people, is the other. All right? From his play, No Exit. Now, it's a reference to the look and the perpetual ontological struggle of being caused to see oneself as an object in the world of another consciousness. So in this play, it's not very long, so you should all read it, or at least Google it on Wikipedia, and it gives you a pretty good rundown. 3 people basically die and go to hell, and they get led into this room, and then the door's locked. A guy and two women, and there's no, and that's hell. And they don't understand what they're doing there. And they know they've gone there because they've done something really immoral, and then I'm not sure if they want to admit it to each other, and they're not sure why this is hell, sitting in a room with just 3 comfy chairs. All right, one of the characters, Inez, tries to seduce Estelle by offering to be her mirror, by telling her everything she sees. Because Inez likes this Estelle. Estelle is a kind of a beautiful sort of character, physically beautiful. But Inez instead ends up frightening her. I'll be your mirror. This is what I see. Estelle is happy. Yeah, am I beautiful? Am I this? Then Inez keeps talking. Suddenly Estelle's like, oh, please stop. I don't think I want you to be my mirror anymore, right? Caught in the look of the other. And there's this kind of master-slave dialectics forming, because there's sort of a sexual dimension which isn't sort of reciprocated. Inez is attracted to Estelle, but Estelle is attracted to the man, Garcin. And Garcin is in no mood for sexual behaviour. You've just died and gone to hell for your crimes, so you're not going to be maybe too happy or too in the mood. Estelle responds to Inez, you scare me rather. My reflection in the glass never did that, of course. I knew it so well, like something I had tamed. So the way people are a mirror for the others can not necessarily be smooth. I've found some other quotes which are interesting and demonstrate the concepts of this week. So this is hell. I'd never have believed it. You remember all we were told about torture chambers, the fire and brimstone, the burning marl, old wives' tales. There's no need for red-hot pokers. Hell is other people. All right? The famous line. There's also one that reminds me of the notion of responsibility, when the male character is complaining that he died too soon. I died too soon. I could have done this. I was going to do that. I was going to make good the crimes of my life. And the response from the other is, one always dies too soon or too late, and yet one's whole life is complete at that moment with the line drawn neatly under it, ready for the summing up. You are your life and nothing else. That's a Sartrean sort of idea, I think, playing itself out there, that there's no predetermined essence. What you choose determines who you are. You are the sum of your actions. It's only through your creative choices as a free self, as a forward self, that you determine your essence. And if you die, there's no like, oh, but I was going to do this, but I was going to do that. So you've already done all that, and that's who you are now. So that's just sort of part of his ethical point. Another quote, I'm going to smile, and my smile will sink down into your pupils, and heaven knows what it will become. Garcin, will night never come? Inez, never. Garcin, you will always see me? Inez, always. It has a pretty dramatic ending too, so I recommend that just skim through it at least. Read the start, the setup, and then read the last 2 pages, because you see Sartre's key concepts being played out in sort of literary form, and it's a very famous play. It's very well done. All right, now, what's Sartre have to say about love? Love hearts and unicorns and Hallmark cards, roses and boxes of chocolates? No? That's right. For Sartre, love is sadomasochism. Right? So for him, the relationship of love, of being for others, like maybe not literally, but if it is, someone made the whipping motion, which I happened to catch in my look. So the master-slave dialectic, being caught in the look of the other, that sort of battle, it happens in love as well for Sartre, right? For him, it involves either masochism, turning oneself into an object for the other, or sadism, making the other into an object for yourself. For example, imagine I'm Sartre, right? I look at Simone de Beauvoir, my lifelong partner, and I say, you are my homemaker. All right? I've turned her into an object for myself in a sadistic way, Sartre would say. Beauvoir might respond, you are my breadwinner. Right? Now she's doing the same thing. You're going to be that object for me. Go out and do those things. She's making him into an object. Right? And vice versa. You can also do it the other way around. Like Sartre might look at her masochistically and say, I am your breadwinner. Like I will take on this role. I'll be that object for you. And de Beauvoir might respond masochistically on the other way. So I go and say, I am your homemaker. I will be your homemaker. I will masochistically turn myself into an object for your purposes. Yeah? You are my rock, I am your rock. You are my nurturer, I am your nurturer. You are my sex object, I am your sex object. So there's an active and a passive sense corresponding to sadism and masochism for Sartre. You can imagine, I don't know if you guys have seen any films by Jean-Luc Godard, the French New Wave director. Yeah, he does a lot of stuff like that. It's like, boy, girl, la femme, revolver, and there's a lot of like ping pong matches between people sort of in the gaze and sort of contesting to this sort of dialectic. It's very well done. Amazing filmmaker. But that's what's going on there. But like I was saying, we'll discuss this more in the toots too. Like, maybe you think it's too negative or too pessimistic, but by being aware of those structures, they make up your facticity. Doesn't mean you have to reduce yourself to those facts. They're the sort of conditions from which you can creatively respond to through your choices. But next week we'll deal with Simone de Beauvoir. I think this is an extra interesting photo because on the left there it sort of illustrates the notion of recognition, like when a woman, and a man can do this too of course, sort of checks her hair in the mirror, right? Then she turns to you and says, how do I look? So she's sort of depending on the recognition of the other to establish who she is. So you see where that sort of relation can come in. Maybe she thinks, oh, I look really good. And then she goes, how do I look? Maybe someone else says, you look terrible. Oh, well, do I? Or is there some kind of dialectic going on here? Maybe she thinks she looks terrible and someone says, no, you look fine. So that's an example of how the recognition of the other or the look of the other is used to sort of determine and consolidate and maybe challenge who we are, our perceptions of ourselves. And de Beauvoir, of course, has a very equally negative view of the sexual relation, of gender relations, which basically, if I can sum it up, will be like all the differences between the sexes are in a sense the result of man having subjugated an oppressed woman, turning her into his slave. Next week you'll get to think about whether you agree with that or not. I think it's the interesting thing is to examine the relationship between equality and difference. When is difference just? When is it unjust? When is equality a just thing to impose? when is it not, because it just imposes violence on differences which we actually quite enjoy. That's what de Beauvoir is trying to tackle. Whether she does it well or not, you will be the judge. You won't have toots, because it's next Friday, which is Good Friday, and there won't be a lecture either. However, Russell's going to record the Wednesday lecture in Geelong and put it up online, so you'll be able to just read. There's only a couple of short readings for that one, so you'll be able to read it, listen to the lecture, and if you want to write on that topic, if you're interested in